Yay, hi everyone. Welcome in. Look at this chat. I love it.
I know. Welcome. If you can go to the next slide. Welcome to Answering the Call, Empowering Communities to Prevent Suicide Among Black Youth webinar. And thank you all for being here. We are dedicated to providing Black youth across the country with the resources and support they need to reduce suicidal behavior and enhance their mental well-being. We hope you enjoy. Feel free to ask questions, use emojis to show your support, and most importantly, share what you learned today with your community. Let's answer the call together. Due to the excitement of the webinar, we will also be streaming via SAMHSA YouTube page for those that are unable to join through Zoom. Please let us know your name, the state you're from, and something you're excited about learning in this webinar. Next slide. We are your hosts. My name is Amber Green, and this is Ashley Husbands, Public Health Advisors for the Suicide Prevention Branch. We're excited to showcase the amazing work that the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative team, the state, and our subject matter experts have been doing to support Black youth nationwide. Ashley will now cover the objectives and housekeeping details.
All right. Thank you, Amber. Welcome in, everyone. As she stated, it's a jam-packed agenda, so we are just going to briefly touch on some objectives we hope that you all walk away with today. We're going to explore data, trends, health disparities, gaps in services, and then most importantly, discuss and learn about ways your communities can get involved and connect with one another, because that's how we can really drive forward these efforts. Next slide, please. All right, really quickly on housekeeping. As you can see, everyone has been muted. The only videos up are our panelists. We just want to make sure that we're creating a respectful environment, which is already happening now. So I love that. We're going to reserve questions for at the end, and feel free to use the Q&A section that's right next to the chat, which you already know where the chat is. So we'll answer those questions at the end in Q&A, but it will be really difficult to see questions in chat. So let's use chat to connect, Q&A to ask questions. And hello out there, it is streaming on YouTube right now. Welcome in, and we are so excited to get started. And next slide, please. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to our Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative co-leads, Brandon Johnson and Dr. Belina Shaw. So I'm going to turn it over to Brandon to walk us through more about the history of the initiative and the academies. So Brandon.
Hello, everyone. I am super excited to be a part of this today. Super excited to see so many people logging on. So hello as people are trickling in, and a huge shout out to our hosts and organizers today, Amber and Ashley. Appreciate the work that you all have put in to put this together. And so good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are. I am greeting you on behalf of the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative co-leads, myself and Dr. Belina Shaw, who you'll hear from in a bit. Again, it's an honor to work with her and to put her on the spot. It's her birthday, so if we could show her some love in the chat too, for all her hard work and to celebrate her today. I would love to do look all that stuff popping in. Okay, so I wanted to spend a bit of time really just talking about the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative. And this is the initiative that is really where our Black Youth Suicide Prevention work sits. So I'm the branch chief of the Suicide Prevention Branch. And when we were kind of looking at where we wanted to go in next steps in the branch, what populations we wanted to look at, there was a number of data reports and things coming out specifically around Black youth suicide. So there was a CDC report that there was a significant increase in suicide deaths among Black youth and young adults between the ages of 10 to 24. There was also a monumental document that came out from the Congressional Black Caucus in 2019 called Ring the Alarm, which was really developed to shine a light on Black youth suicide across the country. And I want to shout out Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman for her dedication to getting that released. And so if you see the webinar title and you're wondering why it's called Answering the Call, it's because we're responding to the Ring the Alarm report with all of the work that we've done over these past few years. And so with this initiative, myself and Dr. Belina Shaw, and you'll hear from so many of our staff who work on this initiative, we set out to reduce suicidal thoughts, attempts, and deaths for Black youth and young adults between the ages of 5 to 24 in the country. If you see here, these are our 5 pillars. This is where our work really sits, around these 5 pieces. So cross-cutting equity initiatives, promoting best practices, providing training and technical assistance, building community awareness, and advancing data and evaluation. So this is where our structure is. And so when we were putting this initiative together, we had some staff, and we were looking at this, and we wanted to know, where do we go as SAMHSA? Where do we go with this initiative? Where do we start? And so as a part of that, what we wanted to do was just bring folks together who are working on this topic, who've dedicated their careers and are passionate about it, folks with lived experience, young people. We really wanted to bring everyone to the table just to get a sense of what was happening in the field, what was happening around this topic and this issue. And so the first thing that we did is that we launched an expert panel meeting. I also want to shout out my co-facilitators in putting this together, Dr. Walker Tisdale and Dr. Tracy Murray, who is no longer with the agency, but want to shout her out as well. And so we put this together to really have conversation around where we could go, what was happening, what were folks seeing from their vantage points. And we really wanted to hear from young people as well. So we had young people with lived experience from Maryland and Detroit come and really share their experiences with us. And so we took all that information, great conversation, and we talked about 988, we talked about barriers to care, we talked about youth experiences, we talked about all these different spaces. And then when we sat down afterwards, we all kind of looked at each other and said, there's so many different directions that we could go to influence this work. Where is SAMHSA best positioned to do the work? And so the answer that we got from that was working directly with the states and communities to advance the work of Black youth suicide. How do we take all the things that we know, all the literature that's out there, and how do we use that to advance the work that's happening at states? And so what was born from that was our Black Youth Suicide Policy Academy, which I'll go through in a bit here. And there's some pictures from our most recent academy, but the goal was to really work with state teams that they could construct. So starting with the state suicide prevention coordinator, they would construct a team of multidisciplinary folks to come to Baltimore year 1, Bethesda year 2, to really learn from some amazing dynamic subject matter experts and young people that you're here from today, really to help us move this work forward and develop a specific action plan to address Black youth suicide within their state. So we wanted to make sure folks were leaving with something tangible to have impact. And so each state was paired with a subject matter expert. They followed a workbook that looked at these specific areas, so data, risk and protective factors, strategic partnerships, and a key one that we were really excited about was youth leadership. How do we make sure that our young people are in position to tell us what they need and for us to respond, for us to be active listeners and not develop something and tell young people, well, you got to utilize it, whether it's what you want or not. We wanted to change that in our states and have our young people really lead this work and us help to advance it and move it forward. So if you're interested in knowing who came, how do we get folks there? These are the folks that participated in our 2 cohorts. And when I wrap up, I'm going to toss it to my friend, Dr. Belina Shaw, to have a conversation with 2 of our states who participated. But we really looked at a couple of different factors. We looked at the suicide rate in the states across the country. We also looked at census data to look at the overall number and population of Black youth and young adults within these states between the ages of 5 to 24. So with these 2 cohorts, these are the first 8 states who accepted invitations to participate. Is the best way that we can put how we selected the states who participated. So if you see your state, you can shout it out in the chat, show some love to your specific state if you see your state listed there, but these were the folks that participated in the academy. This is the amazing, this is SAMHSA leadership, Dr. Delphin Rittman in the center there. This is the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative team. And this is also again, just our leadership team there from the academy that we just recently had. We also had opening remarks from the Surgeon General participating there as well. But really, we wanted this to be different. We wanted this academy to feel different. We wanted it to feel like community, that we were building something together as a collective. We all came there with this passion to influence and impact suicide rates among Black youth. And so going through those workbooks, we have our amazing subject matter experts here on the panel as well. We had deep conversations around what folks were seeing, where were their data points, and we helped them to craft out this plan that folks went home feeling good that they were going to have impact to do there as well. So it wasn't quite a typical policy academy that you may have seen or may have been a part of in some of your other spaces. One thing you've heard me mention it before, but we prided ourselves on youth engagement. We really wanted to ensure that we had young people at the table. And so they were there at the expert panel meeting, they were there at the first academy, and at the second academy, we actually had one of our young people, Janiyah Fields, who you'll hear from later, actually serve as a consultant on the development of the second academy. So we went even beyond just having them do a panel and talk about their experiences, which was amazing and impactful, but we wanted them there in the work and helping to guide us with their lived experiences and lived expertise. So Janiyah, to shout out her, shout out Jalen, Charity, Kaden, who am I missing? I'm missing one. And Young Elder, and thanks for their work in participating with us in putting that together. And it was just such I can't even put it into words of just how amazing it was to have them leading this. And this work also falls in line with the new national strategy for suicide prevention. SAMHSA and CDC had the opportunity to co-lead the development of the new national strategy for suicide prevention. If you haven't seen it already, go to hhs.gov/NSSP. We'll put the link in the chat, but please take a look at it. And if you're really interested in this work and in targeted suicide prevention, I would direct you to Strategic Direction 4, which is health, equity, and suicide prevention. I had the honor of co-leading the development of this national strategy with Dr. Deb Stone from the CDC and leading the health, equity, and suicide prevention piece of this. What we wanted to do was really look at targeted suicide prevention, not just things that were universal that we want to be one size fits all, but how do we really look at specific risk and protective factors, looking at a population such as Black youth and not seeing them as a monolith, understanding that there are unique experiences within their experiences, how they live, where they live, who they interact with, all of those pieces, and wanting to be able to help folks across the country design pathways for suicide prevention that is targeted and specific to their needs and the things that they're going through. So we definitely want to highlight this. And again, the other strategic directions are community-based suicide prevention, treatment and crisis services, surveillance quality improvement, and research. This slide is only going to stay it for a second, but if I see any of you all on another thing, I'm going to quiz you on what the strategic directions are. If not all of them, at least which one strategic direction 4 is. But we're really excited about that work. And that also comes with a federal action plan where we have about 200 actions that we've created as a federal government across 10 federal departments, around 29 federal agencies to address suicide prevention and to advance the goals and the objectives of the national strategy. In addition to this, we do have a landing page now, which is all credit to Amber and Ashley and other folks on our suicide prevention communications team for the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative. So if you want to learn more, we have a learning collaborative led by Janelle Cubbage, who you'll hear from later. There's so much good work happening through the prevention initiative, and we really want to share it with other folks to really be able to spotlight this work and to help other folks get engaged with it as well. And so with the Academy having those states there, we're going to take some time to hear from a couple of states about how it impacted their work. And so I'm going to pass it off to the birthday woman today and have her lead this discussion here with 2 of our states.
Thank you, Brandon. And I just wanted to also say thank you for your leadership. I know you have thanked everyone here in the whole team on the initiative, but you have been a trailblazer in this space, not only in Black youth suicide prevention, but also in suicide prevention as a whole for this nation. And so I just want to thank you publicly here on this webinar during Suicide Prevention Month as well. And thank you all once again for the birthday wishes. So we're going to move on to hearing about the outcomes of this from the Policy Academy. These folks spent 2.5 days with us and worked very diligently to develop plans. And really, I want to start with asking Josephine Ridley, Dr. Josephine Ridley from Ohio. After those 2.5 days, what did you guys do with your plan? What happened? How did you operationalize it?
Sure, I would love to share. And again, I want to thank you and Mr. Johnson for inviting Ohio to be a part of this. And immediately after this, after the academy, which I wasn't present for the actual academy, but after the academy, we went into action. And OSPF, Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, took this information directly to our state and to Ohio MOS. And our state's response was to issue grants, and grants were actually issued to Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation and 5 other organizations. They actually issued us a $500,000 grant. And with that grant, we took to heart all of the recommendations that you all suggested. And one of those main recommendations was to partner. And so we created a community of practice, and we're really proud of our community of practice. We call it our Black Youth and Young Adult Suicide Prevention, COP. We also really put a lot of effort into developing a faith-based suicide prevention workshop, which I created and I've led. And we've been able to present this workshop at 6 different churches that have partnered with other churches, and we've seen some phenomenal responses to that. Right now, we have 31 members in our COP representing 22 organizations. And we've really worked hard to develop conferences. We have podcasts. We have, of course, the workshops. We are promoting evidence-based trainings. We're trying to make sure that every nook and cranny of Ohio has some representation for suicide prevention for our Black youth and young adults. So that's it.
I muted myself too quickly. I want to move on to Hannah from North Carolina. I would just love to hear really what resonated with you. What was what were your most salient pearls when you came back home? I know you just left us recently.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to speak on behalf of the North Carolina team and say that the Policy Academy was truly a transformational experience. We learned a lot, but these are some of our key takeaways. First, data drives targeted planning and outreach efforts. We looked at quite a bit of North Carolina data at the Policy Academy, and while it was really helpful, we noticed some gaps in our existing published data sets. So over the past few weeks since the Policy Academy, we've worked to fill those gaps to better inform our strategies. Now that we've done that, we've decided to focus our efforts on 17 counties in North Carolina. These 17 counties either have the highest death rates for suicide among Black youth and young adults, or they have the highest call volume to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, with a representation of the Black population at least 25%. We're already working on targeted outreach to these counties to bring them to the table. We've invited them to a statewide listening circle that we're hosting in October, where we'll seek feedback and use that to tailor our approaches to ensure that we're as successful as possible. Secondly, I think we really recognize the value of a multi-sector response. We formed a team of 8 plus 1 subject matter expert to lead this effort in North Carolina and attend the Policy Academy. We have representation from government, including public health, mental health, substance use services, and developmental disabilities, public instruction, as well as researchers, clinicians, a pastor and director of a local nonprofit, Black youth, and more. All of these people bring unique knowledge, experience, and capabilities to the table. And I think we really saw firsthand that the inclusion of diverse perspectives and roles allowed us to leave Policy Academy with a plan that we're really proud of. And we're confident that as a collective, we have the knowledge and tools to be successful moving forward. Moving down to number 3, at the Policy Academy, we got the opportunity and the privilege to hear from a panel of Black youth and young adults. This was really a highlight for our entire team. The panelists gave us really valuable, specific insight that guided the development of our action plan. And while I can't speak more highly about this panel, we know that we also need to seek counsel and partnership from Black youth in our state as well. So we're planning to establish a Black Youth Advisory Council. The plan for the council was developed by Reggie Love, who is a student at UNC and a member of our leadership team. So we hope and we plan for the Black Youth Advisory Council to be composed of young adults that represent each of our 17 target counties. So we'll ensure that not only are Black youth involved in this effort, they're playing a leadership role, because we know that we can't do this work without their voices and their partnership. Lastly, moving down to the final bullet point, the youth panel at the Policy Academy spoke a lot about stigma. Specifically, they referenced that if adults within their orbit fail to acknowledge or validate their own mental health, let alone that of the youth, youth will see that and learn it and often mirror it. And the same applies for poor coping skills. So I think for us, this really highlighted the need for education and training, which is a part of our action plan. And we're going to start by hosting mindfulness, self-compassion workshops over the holiday season. But we also recognize that training and education and mindset shifts take time. And while we'll continue to work on it, we know we need a multi-pronged approach. So for that reason, we believe it's critical that we build capacity of peer support services in our state so that Black youth have another channel to access support.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I loved hearing from both of the state representatives, so many things, but the theme and something that just resonated between both was that multi-sector partnership response, including the entire community, including and also including Black youth and centering Black youth in this work. And so when you think about your experience at the Policy Academy and your experiences now as you have begun implementation, what would you tell states or other states that want to do this work? Or also, we have here over 600 and so of our now broader family of community who also have an interest in this too, right? And so some of them might be Black youth, might be Black families, might be also providers and just people in multiple areas and sectors of government. What would you tell people who want to either do this from a leadership standpoint, that they've already have a platform to do it, or those who want to start getting involved, but maybe don't have that platform yet?
I would recommend highly partnerships. One of the problems that happens sometimes at the state level is that the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. And there's also this, this concern at times that I don't want to duplicate something that somebody else is doing, or if I'm doing this, then maybe it robs someone else from doing it. Many hands make light work. We need to recognize that when we all have a common goal to end suicide and Black youth and young adults, any efforts to do that is welcome. And we need to partner together in it and support each other's initiatives. And one thing that happened with our community of practice is that we were overwhelmed by how many different people in the state of Ohio were doing things that were aimed at improving mental health in the Black community, increasing access to services, but it really focused on reducing suicides in this community. Once we realized that, and it was so amazing, it was like a brain trust in the room when we all came together. And slowly we've had more and more people reaching out, wanting to become a part of the community of practice. And it has been so refreshing to be able to travel to different parts of the state, or even to say, if someone reached out, hey, I need this to happen, we would say, hey, I live down in that part of the state, I'll be able to do that. And so we've been able to support each each other in that way. We've been able to share information about requests for proposals for grants. We've been able to support each other in even writing for grants. The strategic prevention framework through Tracy Johnson has been wonderful. We've been all trained in that SPF and in the SPIF framework, and it's just been phenomenal as well. So I think what I would recommend strongly is really find out who is doing the work in your state, look for ways to partner, and even when you're applying for grants, think about partnering in those applications instead of just trying to do it on your own.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hannah?
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree with everything Dr. Ridley said. I'll echo many of her points. I think that for folks who are new to this work, I would recommend that you start by reading some of the major publications, specifically the ones that Brandon mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, like Ring the Alarm and Still Ringing the Alarm. I think these will give you a foundation of knowledge that will A, help you learn about the topic thoroughly, but B, help you advocate for it to be made a priority within your organization or outside of it. In addition to that, I'd recommend that you connect with your state suicide prevention coordinator. Many states have one, and or connect with someone else who has a head start. There are a lot of really knowledgeable people in this space, whether that's another state that's involved or SAMHSA or subject matter experts. This is a collective effort, and I believe that in order to make true progress, we have to work together. So don't be afraid to reach out, ask the questions, and have the conversation.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I think that that's so important, just starting with educating ourselves and knowing that there's already been trailblazers that have been doing this work, whether or not it be in the written space or a community-based space in your own local communities, and finding them, partnering with them, and reaching out to really build those coalitions, collaboratives, and move this work forward. And we all love that many hands make the work light, and appreciate your sets of hands. And also I appreciate the sets of hands of our hosts, and I'm going to turn it right back on over to them. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And happy birthday on camera. All right. So thank you so much to Dr. Ridley and Hannah for sharing so much about the work that you're doing in your states. Earlier, folks were in the chat shouting out their states. So North Carolina, Ohio, now's your chance. Get connected to these folks. They know what's up. So now we're going to just pivot over to our phenomenal young adult SMEs subject matter experts. We have the pleasure of having Janiyah Fields and Jalen Bull with us here today. So Amber and I are going to tag team, ask you a few questions and let the audience engage with you and get to know more about who you are and the work that you are doing currently. So our first question for you is simple. Just please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about the work that you're involved in, and also tell us what is your why. And audience, this is your time to shine as well in the chat. Tell us all what's your why, what you're motivated, what keeps you motivated to do this work. So let's start with you, Janiyah.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janiyah Fields. I'm a senior psychology Africana Studies minor at McDaniel College. Little bit about me. I really enjoy mental health advocacy work. I also work on suicide prevention research at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and Dr. Adams Grace Lab. As far as my why, I understand how hard it is to have conversations about suicide and talking about feelings that can be really taboo, and it's scary, and I don't expect everyone to be comfortable with that, but I do know that having a conversation is this first step. Acknowledging that there are barriers that come with being Black and being a young person also are contributors to this, and also understanding that dealing with that trauma and that personal experience and sharing it and vocalizing it can be difficult as well. So I just want to help where I can, and I want to show youth that their voice does matter and that they do have a say in changing the narrative as well as getting out there that our lives do matter, whether it is from a standpoint of mental health or mental wellness or just belonging here, regardless of the discrimination that's happening in our society right now.
Thank you so much. Oh, I felt like snapping during that. That was a word. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and all the work you've done for Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative as well. So definitely kudos to you. All right, turning it over to you, Ms. Shaylin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jalen Bull, and I'm a psychology major at Bowie State University. I really don't have any major projects going on right now as I am a freshman, so adjusting to college life is my #1 project right now. As far as my why, it's really important to me to show that anyone can do this. You don't have to be an expert or have a PhD. Your lived experience is enough, and it is important. Just a little tidbit from the last suicide policy academy that I went to, I was sharing my experience with dealing with suicide in my specific school. And after my panel was over, one state came up to me and she said, "There's no protocol for what happened to you in my state. If something happened to you, like what happened, or if something that happened to you would happen to one of my kids at my schools, there's nothing that we could do." So me being able to share that experience and make someone else realize, okay, well, maybe I couldn't prevent it for her, but I can prevent it for the next person. That's all the reason in the world for me to keep going.
Thank you both so much. I'm sorry. So how do younger generations view suicide? How are your peers having conversations around suicide? And how do we best craft our messaging to meet their needs? Janai, would you like to start?
Sure, I can start.
Mhm.
I would say that I find it's either on one end or the other. You either have people who are like kind of waiting for one person to like say it, address the elephant in the room, and then people are like, yeah, well, I actually have felt like that, but it's scary to be the first one, so sometimes it goes untalked about. But then on the other end, I know numerous youth who, if given the opportunity, would address it and do want to speak about it and do have their own opinions or, experiences with it. Like you heard Jalen so eloquently speak about like wanting to speak about suicide. And at the Policy Academy, we had so many other youth that are willing to be engaged in the conversation and know what they're talking about from their own personal experience, but also understanding that what's going on in our world right now. So I think that the younger generation are getting more comfortable speaking about suicide. I think that sometimes you do need that one person to kind of nudge you in that direction and be like, okay, let's talk about this. Let's have this space. And I think that that's really important, but I do think that we are heading in the right direction. And if we continue to give a space for youth to talk about it, like we were given a space from SAMHSA, I think that they would want to. And I think that we need to promote it for younger and younger and younger generations.
Thank you so much. Jalen, would you like me to repeat the question or are you okay?
I'm good. I
Okay.
noticed that in my circles, suicide is talked about extremely casually. Whenever something goes wrong, whenever you're not feeling the best, suicide is brought up so casually, like, I failed a test today, I'm gonna kill myself. Or I didn't do so well on this assignment, I'm gonna kill myself. Almost like it's the immediate and first option that these children are thinking about. And personally, I went to a high school that was 6 through 12, and I would notice it a lot in the middle schoolers and underclassmen high schoolers, just an immediate want or desire to commit suicide when anything doesn't go their way. On the flip side, I also noticed that there, like Janaya said, there is a lot of youth that want to speak about their experience, but just don't know how. At the Policy Academy, there was at least 2 youth that came up to me and they said, "I want to be on the next panel. I want to talk about stuff like this as well. I didn't even know that there was something like this in my state." So just making sure that there's avenues for young people to express their needs and desires and their experience, because like I said before, anyone can really be an expert on the situation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. I hope people are paying attention. Youth want to be involved. They're just waiting on that invite. Let them in. They're going to tell you what they need better than anybody else. So let's try to be better at inviting our youth in and engaging them. I have another question for you both. And I'm going to start with you this time, Jalen, if that's okay. So there's been multiple efforts to embed and enhance mental health in churches, schools, etc. What other settings should we explore? Like, what are we missing? Help us out.
So I actually love this question. When we talk about spaces like safe spaces, we often go through the church, school, and those are wonderful and amazing avenues. But I feel or I noticed that one important avenue to take is finding suicide and beating suicidal tendencies where youth is learning about it. So the youth are not learning about self-harm and suicide methods through the church or through their schools. They're learning it on online chat rooms, forums, so on and so forth. So while it is important to have safe spaces and those kinds of rooms, it's also important to kind of nip it in the bud where it is. So it's important to get on Snapchat, Instagram, Discord, and almost flood those chats with positive messaging because they are so overfilled with ways to cut yourself or harm yourself or burn yourself. So making sure that you're flooding those online chat rooms with methods to maybe harm reduce, speak to someone, 988 numbers, reach them where they are. Like I saw someone say in the chat, it's important to reach them where they are, not just where they want to be.
Ooh, I love that. Reach them where they are, not just, ooh, okay, let me calm down.
It's okay, but these are the conversations we need to have. You know, we shouldn't be afraid to have these conversations. We want to listen to you. So, you know, we really truly do appreciate how vulnerable you are and how, you know, as you mentioned, eloquently spoken of just saying like, this is what we need and standing, what do they say, 10 toes down on it, right? So ignore
What
me.
they say,
But
standing on
seriously, like,
business
it's
now?
important.
Is that the new standing on business? Okay, I'm hip. Yeah. All right. And Janaya, the same question for you.
Yeah, as I talked a little bit about at the Policy Academy, for me growing up, extracurriculars were a really big thing. I think that a lot of youth that are involved in extracurriculars, whether it's sports or theater or music, really have a certain level of trust in the people that are within those spaces, whether it's teammates, coaches, instructors, etc. So like Jalen said, while school is great, church is great, I think that this is something that you should be learning holistically throughout all aspects of, you know, their everyday routine and the activities that they participate in. So for example, I grew up in theater and like being able to express myself via like characters and things like that. And I think it's important that we embed like, you know, this is what people are actually feeling. These aren't just characters. How are you feeling portraying these characters? Is this something that you feel like you would want to do? And I think that is something that could be really interesting as well as really helpful because, you know, you already trust these people that are in these spaces, like I said, whether it's a coach or a teammate. So being able to talk to them and learn about suicide while you're also learning about things that you love to do or like to do and how you can use that to kind of learn how to deal with your feelings and also express it and make it a normal conversation, I think could be something that is really helpful and can teach kids at an early age that like, even in this space, you can talk about suicide. Even with these people, you can have conversations with suicide and feel comfortable and feel seen and, you know, still enjoy doing what you love. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. We almost don't want to let y'all go. We don't. We really don't.
Like a few more questions, but there will be time to talk to y'all a little bit more at the end. But I mean, this was just so insightful. We really appreciate how open and honest you both have been just talking to us all. So thank you.
Thank you both. Before we transition, can we just get like each of you, just one thing, one key thing you want everyone to take away from today, from listening to you? Because people are eager to hear more from you. So just one thing each. If you say nothing else, this is what you want people to take away from this webinar today. Whoever wants to start.
I can start. The most important and key takeaway that I would want people to know is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I see people creating policy academies and advisory boards, and those things are so good, amazing. There's also ways and avenues to connect through students through existing programs. Like, what if I told you guys that there is a group of students at almost every high school that is 100% committed to doing work like this? It's called National Honor Society. Look at these groups in schools and reach out to them. A lot of these young groups are just waiting for someone to reach out to them and give them the work. So many of these students and extracurriculars are based on service to their community and to their peers. So it is important to reach out to them and request their help because, like I said, and I'll keep saying it, you don't have to be an expert or have a PhD to talk about this subject. All you have to do is have an open heart and open ears. So please listen to the youth. Please reach out to them, reach out to existing communities. All we really want to do is help and provide you with our experience.
That was amazing, Jalen. Oh, I fangirl over Jalen. I lived through Jalen. Anyway, one thing I would want people to take away is, and I say this all the time, experience is just as important as data. You have youth who have this experience. You have youth who have a voice and who have relatability and this connection with other youth. So use them. You have a door, you have a platform, you have to keep it open so that other generations can come through and so that they could continue to keep this effort moving forward. Me and Jalen won't be young forever. We're already in college, and I know I'm not old. I'm not about to start because I know how people get, but I do want to say that there are 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds who have big voices, big Black experience, big Black voices, and they need the platform too. They can become the future of suicide prevention, and they just need the opportunity. The only thing standing between a lot of people and success or moving things forward is opportunity. So let them use their experiences and their voice to continue to move this movement forward and bring awareness to suicide.
Can we just clap it up for Janiyah, please? Because I love her so much. I remember when Janiyah was still in high school and now she's on to bigger and better things. She's been to the White House. Like, this girl is amazing. Like, just show her love in the chat because she, like, words can't even describe how amazing she is and how far that she has truly come. Like, just clap it up for her, y'all.
Thanks, girl.
I mean, I feel like we all just had to take a deep breath in, deep breath out because it was just that good, right? Like, it was, y'all are excellent. And we really do appreciate y'all for sharing again and being here. So again, we would love to keep y'all. We're going to talk a little bit more for the question and answer. But now we will turn it over to Dr. Walker Tisdale. Okay.
Thank you so much. Let's keep the momentum and the vibes going. This is like such an awesome conversation. I'm happy to be here. Can you hear me?
Well, Dr. Walker Tisdale, would you like me to introduce you?
Oh. Go ahead. I heard turn it over and I kept going. I'm sorry.
Listen, because you deserve all the intro, okay? So Dr. Walker Tisdale is the public health analyst for the Office of Behavioral Health Equity and a key member of the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative team. And then Walker will lead in an exciting discussion with our equity panel. So I just had to make sure everyone knows who you are, Dr. Walker Tisdale. So go ahead, take it away.
But thank you so much. I appreciate that warm welcome. And I'm just also so inspired by the conversation. So I would like to, for the equity component of this webinar to really introduce some amazing people to also provide some insights from an equity lens. And so I'm going to introduce folks, and we have some structured questions specifically for each of you. So I'll pose a specific question to each of you. First, I'd like to start on the screen. Dr. Alex Crosby, who is on faculty at Morehouse School of Medicine. Welcome to him. And you can show these folks some love as well in the chat. Dr. Jasmine Brooks Stevens, an incoming assistant professor of psychology at UC Berkeley. And Brittany Carradine Clemens, who works at the Suicide Prevention Resource Center and is Director of Belonging. And Dr. Sonia Richardson, Assistant Professor at School of Social Work at UNC Chapel Hill. Welcome to each of you. I am going to start with Dr. Brooks and giving your background and your experience in suicide prevention. Regarding advancing equity in suicide prevention, what do you consider to be a critical priority and why?
Wonderful question. So as Brandon shared in the beginning of this webinar, earlier this year, right, SAMHSA and the CDC released that 2024 National Strategy for Suicide Prevention, which wonderfully, that strategic direction 4 really centers on this question, right? So absolutely my answer is informed by this. So I wanted to highlight that as well. But first, what I believe is one of the most critical priorities in this direction is that we so often focus on reducing risk. While yes, this is very important, while it's very important to realize what are these factors that are exacerbating suicide risk, in my opinion, right, we also are not spending as much time focusing on how do we promote reasons for wanting to live? How do we identify and give youth or individuals from these historically marginalized backgrounds a sense of purpose or meaning in life? How do we give them a sense of agency? How do we help them create narratives that are different from the narratives that they see every day, where this is the outcome for individuals that feel as hopeless as they do, right? So that's what a lot of my work has been focusing on now, is those strengths-based approaches to suicide prevention through answering some of those questions that I mentioned. Also, I believe that we need to incorporate perspectives and recommendations from, we just heard from two, right? Individuals and youth and people in the community who either have experienced thoughts of suicide, who are survivors of suicide loss, but hearing from these individuals and voices of the community. This can occur at every level. I know a lot of colleagues so far have already described how we're developing advisory panels, right? National advisory panels, youth advisory panels. That's certainly one direction as well. But I think also through qualitative research, through mixed methods research, through bringing in voices of individuals who have these experiences. That's how we can better inform our future directions in this area. Also, which I believe Jalen really highlighted this point as well, but catching up with technology, right? According to a recent national study, the average age at which children in the US receive their first phone is 11, right? 11 years old. So now these youth are exposed to bullying interpersonally, but also via the internet. We have racial trauma, discrimination that's experienced interpersonally, but also vicariously via phones, right? We have shows like 13 Reasons Why that teenagers are watching. And so overall, this awareness of suicide is occurring from a much younger age. Therefore, we need to take our interventions to digital spaces, leverage social media to support suicide prevention efforts, right? And I wrote it down, Jalen, because it was so powerful, but reach people where they are, right? Such a powerful statement that she said there, but that definitely aligns with one of the priorities I wanted to highlight for you all today. I know we have such little time. So the fourth one that I will highlight for you all is this focus on promoting psychoeducation and awareness of suicide prevention among parents, caregivers, and healthcare professionals, right? So this involves improving awareness of and detection of risk and protective factors for suicide across historically marginalized communities, as well as how to properly respond when these are noticed, right? So we're aware of these risk factors because we're learning more about it. We're talking more about it. We're having more culturally relevant trainings. But also, what do we do with that? That's also the part that I think is missing, is thankfully we're improving detection, but what do we do? what do parents do? What do we say? What do mental health care professionals, what if we're a PCP that's noticing this? I mean, what do I do? What power do I have? Right. And so that is also where I think that we need to focus on developing, disseminating, and evaluating more culturally informed screening tools, more, again, strategies around intervention through all of these different spaces, but really through psychoeducation and trainings in that way around reducing barriers to care, addressing the stigma around talking about suicide or seeking mental health care for suicide concerns there. But so yeah, those are four of again, some of the work that I'm leading in some of these spaces as well, but as so many of my colleagues here are also leading. And so through working together, through working in the community, bringing in diverse perspectives, I think that's where we can see a lot of these different impacts there for those priorities.
Wow, that's a whole word. Thank you so much for that. And I would just say, because it's echoed in the chat a couple of times, if you haven't seen it, in terms of echoing your message about giving people a reason to live, because oftentimes people don't recognize that people who are considering suicide or suicidality don't want to die. They want to stop the pain, right? And so that really leads us to our next question for you, Dr. Richardson. In your work with interventions and culturally adapting interventions, we know that they're not always developed with people of color, with youth of color in mind. So I wanted to ask you specifically, what interventions have you found to be most competent and safe for Black youth, and which ones need to be?
Thank you so much for your question. Very important question. And I also want to thank Dr. Brooks Stephen for your input, because it helps to add to what I'm going to say. So when we think about giving people, wanting to give people reasons to live, my research focuses on creating conditions for Black youth to thrive. I don't want us to just live. I want Black youth to thrive. And so when we think about suicide prevention interventions for Black youth, we know that they really need to focus on their some of their risk factors, but like Dr. Brooks Stevens said, really their protective factors. So what are some of the protective factors that are specific to Black youth? Racial socialization, that's teaching Black youth what it means to be Black, and the Black experience and how to cope with that and deal with that in our society, and also learning how to deal with racism, which is something that they deal with on a daily basis, but oftentimes aren't taught how to deal with that unless they're getting that from their family or community. Also, we know protective factors are spirituality, connectedness, and mattering, feeling as if you matter in this world. If you think about the whole idea, the slogan was created, Black Lives Matter. Mattering is a protective factor. We have to let our youth know that they matter. So when you think about those protective factors that I mentioned, racial socialization, connectedness, and mattering, which evidence-based interventions for mental health do you know that actually address those issues? There aren't very little. The evidence-based interventions that we currently have not been designed for Black youth in mind. They have been designed from a very colorblind approach. And so when we think about designing these interventions for Black youth, there are some that exist and some that are being tested. And so I want to use my time that I have with you today to highlight some Black women researchers who are creating interventions for Black youth or have created them. And I want to say their names. And as I say their names and say their research, if you don't mind, audience, putting their names in the chat, because I want you to hear their names and I want you to follow them and I want you to support them. And I also acknowledge these are some of the Black women researchers, but as it was stated, all of us are researchers. If you have lived experience, you are an expert as well, and you are a researcher as well. So first up, Dr. Sherry Molock is M-O-L-O-C-K. Dr. Molock is a faculty member at George Washington University. And her lab, they have developed the Haven Connect intervention, Haven. That stands for, get this, helping alleviate valley experiences now, like right now, okay? That's her intervention that she developed with her lab. Haven is a comprehensive depression and suicide intervention for youth, specifically aimed to be integrated and developed and implemented in Black churches. It uses social connections, coping skills development, kinship, and guidance to foster a sense of connectedness and mattering. Okay, so that's Dr. Sherry Molock. Second up, Dr. Rhonda Boyd. Dr. Boyd is a faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania in the School of Medicine. Her and her colleagues are conducting a study to adapt the suicidal teens accessing treatment and it's STATED. Which is a patient navigation intervention. Now, this intervention is for youth once they present to the hospital for suicidal ideation. Her team has culturally adapted this intervention for Black youth. So when Black youth go to the hospital, they have a patient navigation experience for when it's time for them to leave and get connected to resources, where it embeds some of that cultural experiences and those protective factors. So Dr. Boyd and her team are now conducting a randomized control trial with that intervention. Okay, so that's Dr. Rhonda Boyd. Next up, we have Dr. Janelle Goodwill. Dr. Janelle Goodwill is a faculty member at the University of Chicago, and her team are culturally adapting the signs of suicide intervention. Signs of Suicide is a universal school-based suicide prevention intervention, but it has not been developed specifically for Black youth. So she has worked with the local community to adapt the intervention for Black youth. And this fall is going to be tested and piloted in predominantly Black schools in Chicago's South Side. So that's happening this year, and that's Dr. Goodwill. You also have Dr. Lavone Robinson. So Dr. Robinson is a faculty member at DePaul University. Her and her team have developed a culturally adapted version of the Adapted Coping with Stress Intervention. Adapted Coping with Stress Intervention. Now, this intervention is a well-researched intervention, and it includes 15 cognitive behavioral group-based sessions that are developed specifically for Black youth that help them learn how to decrease stress associated with systemic racism. Okay, so it's teaching them some stress skills to regulate themselves and to respond to racism. And so this has been developed specifically for Black youth, and it's been tested, and it is an intervention. And then just two more, y'all. We have Dr. Ariel Sheftall. Dr. Sheftall, Sheftall, is just an OG in Black youth suicide research. And so I always got to call out her name when I'm in her spaces. But she is really focused on alleviating first suicide attempts, because if you don't know, suicide attempts and suicide ideations are really high among Black youth. Yes, our rates are increasing for death by suicide, but our rates of attempts is really high, particularly among our Black girls. Last but not least, myself, Sonia Richardson. I am a professor at UNC Chapel Hill, and my team is developing a culturally adapted care coordination intervention called CA Link. And so our intervention is really focused on Black youth who have experienced suicidal thoughts in the last 90 days. They are connected to a community health worker or peer support specialist who follows them over 90 days and teaches them coping skills and strategies, assesses their suicide risk. We produce videos with African-centered values. We're teaching some racial socialization, and we're connecting them to culturally inclusive resources and providers in their local communities. And so there are researchers doing this work. There are interventions that we are creating to help lead this work. So follow this work, promote this work, reach out to us. We are here, we are available. But as Jalen stated, and I'll say this again, all of our lived experiences on this call makes us experts. So everyone can help this mission.
Dr. Richardson, thank you so much. You cannot see, I don't know if you could see, but Brandon and I were both lighting up as you were reading each of these names. There is such value in all of the names, and I so appreciate that you gave voice to elevating them and in the chat. And if you didn't add your name to the list, I was gonna say, I need to add one more. So thank you for doing that. Let me go to Dr. Alex Crosby. So when we talk about data, this is a really great transition. I never heard the term OG in suicide prevention before. I'm gonna add another OG who I think name belongs in there, Dr. Crosby, who I've known for a while. And I really appreciate your background. And we didn't even mention this, for your years in medical epidemiology at CDC. And one of the things I know that you have a lot of insight to in terms of how data can be used to advance whatever your cause is. And I wonder if you could speak to, in particular, how data can be used for people who are interested in getting funding for suicide prevention initiatives, qualitative, quantitative data, and what have you seen that works?
Sure. If I could just start off and thank Dr. Brooke Stevenson and Dr. Richardson for their for their wonderful comments. And, I was thinking as Dr. Richardson was talking, the Hall of Fame. She was talking about the Hall of Fame there. So that was important for us to understand. And not only Hall of Fame, sometimes when we think of Hall of Fame, we think of, the guys that did it 200 years ago and they're long gone. No, these are folks doing it right now. So this is the Hall of Fame of folks that are active doing the work right now. So fantastic. How can we use data? I think it's important for us to be able to say that you often want to put together the data with the lived experience, with the community perspective. Those things have to be put together. Definitely, you got to have the data when you're applying for funding and trying to prove your case to certain groups that may not be aware. You got to come in and kind of bring them from point A to point Z in order for them to understand why this is an important issue. And, one of the things that's important for us to demonstrate, just as, we mentioned regarding the Congressional Black Caucus, was to say, look, this population, this community, the rates are rising faster than any other rate. So you're demonstrating what the need is here. And even though if you don't necessarily say the numbers are high yet, we're not going to wait until it's a crisis, right? We don't want to wait until the folks are right at the edge in order to act. What we want to do is we want to prevent that from happening so that we can do early intervention, early prevention. So you're using the data, you're using that information to be able to show what the problem is, what the magnitude is, and then also show this is where we want to prevent it from getting. There's various kinds of data that you might want to, put into that. Is that the mortality, the death certificate data? Is that data from hospitalizations, data from emergency departments, data from surveys in which you can ask folks about their experience, in the past 12 months or in the past year or even, lifetime. So you're using those different kind of modalities to show here's the magnitude of the problem. It's not just over here in this one little place, but actually it's spreading. And so we got to do something about it.
Thank you for that. And so the lived experience with the data is a powerful combination is what I'm hearing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've heard, and I think our youth panel talked about the lived experience folks are experts, with their own, and actually they probably have some peers and probably have some folks in the community that they've talked to, had a conversation with, that they've worked with. So you've got to add that in because we want to be data informed, as one of my mentors used to tell me, data informed, but community sensitive. So yes, that data can help us in terms of understanding what some of the parameters are, but you got to talk to the people that are living in order to be able to really be able to make your case. One of the things in terms of trying to convince the policymakers, the decision makers, is you've got to have the data, but you've also got to have that narrative, that storytelling to be able to say, Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so that lived in my community, this is what they're going through. And this is why we need to make this a priority because we've got to address their issue.
Great information. I appreciate that. There is, I'd like to transition to Brittany. Brittany, in working with you and SPRC, I'm not sure if our audience may or may not know all the great things that SPRC is doing. So I'm going to start and ask you, can you give us a little background, the context of the work that you do at SPRC? And in particular, any initiatives or activities that specifically speak to what can people identify at SPRC to help them to get more smart or to get better informed around Black youth suicide?
Yeah, thank you, Walker. So a vast array of different things that we engage in to advance equity in the field of suicide prevention as SPRC. And as I was thinking, a lot of times when we might mention advancing equity or even the word equity, sometimes I see the role of SPRC, the work that we need to do is really help folks identify, demystify, and break down that word. There's some really good equity work that are happening in communities, states, and territories all over the country. And so being able to help folks understand, becoming aware, and identify just what those things are, I see is really an important role of the work that we do within SPRC, in addition to not just identifying those communities, but actually engaging in the work with those communities. And so helping folks remain committed to those communities that are most impacted, the communities that are historically and intentionally marginalized. So I'm thinking about the Black, the Indigenous, right? Rural communities. How many of you know that you can live in the intersection of identity and be rural and Black? And so the things that we want to deploy to those communities needing to be specific and culturally relevant, right? Persons with disability. We've talked a lot about youth, but also thinking about those that are justice involved, considering them a part of the work that we do when we think about advancing equity, is how we see our role at SPRC, but also immigrant and refugee communities. And so thinking about what are the different ways that we are trying to connect knowledge and information so that we can then build the tools, the knowledge, the information sources, the webinars, the pieces that folks are going to need out in the field to actually do this work. Our states and territories team, led by Dr. Alex Caridi, as well as our tribal initiatives team, led by Scott Barton, lead a huge data point for an assessment for each of those different populations so that we can really get the really good data to inform the work that we're going to be doing, to understand where is it that we need to concentrate that community-focused work, where is it that we need to concentrate driving some of that equity work, and then using that really good knowledge and information to drive training, to drive the direct knowledge and information that folks are going to need to help upskill the suicide prevention workforce to engage in some of this equity work with and for communities. I like to really emphasize the training that we do within Suicide Prevention Resource Center, because how many of you know communities can be harmed and have been harmed by the work that we're doing, whether it is the data collection we are trying to engage in, the program or intervention that we are trying to share, some of the information that we are trying to put out in these different communities due to our practices or lack thereof have been harmed by some of the important work that we're trying to do. So engaging in webinar series, sharing information around research and insights via infographics, being able to share actually continuing education courses and trainings, again, to support people in some of the really important work that they are wanting to do, but being able to do that in a way where they are culturally informed, that they are culturally specific, that they understand the communities that they are to connect and identify with when wanting to do some of this work. Something that was mentioned earlier, I believe, by Dr. Brooke Stevens, was really creating like these sources of joy and finding information that actually speaks to the why people want to show up and be here. Thinking about our LGBTQIA2 Spirit Guide is one that was not only developed and designed with youth, for youth and their communities, but when we think about interventions and strategies, actually providing a whole document of sources of joy that youth have identified for themselves to say, this is what brings me joy. This is why I want to continue showing up in the world. And so when we think about the information, the resources, the knowledge that SPRC is going to be sharing, putting out into the field of suicide prevention, it is always one that is first engaged with the community that we are hoping that this information will speak to and speak for. Nothing that we develop for youth. Jalen spoke very eloquently about the experience that youth have, bringing those youth into the work that we are doing so that we are providing not good information, but the best information sourced directly from them is important. But then finally, supporting and uplifting. What are we doing? How are we funding, supporting, platforming? Again, the incredible work that has already been done. I want to highlight specifically our best practice registry that is led by Sabrina Strong. So when we think about those interventions, those programs that speak directly to the community, we want to ensure that we are not only leading the field in platforming and sharing, but supporting the field in their understanding of community-defined evidence-based interventions. It's very important that the work that has been done, that communities identify, that they know is the best for their communities, that we are platforming them, that we are uplifting them at SPRC, and that we are using them as examples and supporting others who are wanting to engage in this work. And then I think a final really important critical piece of of the work that we're doing at SPRC to advance equity is with our Lived Experience Advisory Committee. Jayla mentioned that youth today have lots of expertise around suicide-centered lived experience. And so I want to echo that. At Suicide Prevention Resource Center, we're not just using those youth or using folks for their suicide-centered lived experience for their storytelling, although we know that is incredibly important. We also want to use them for their expertise in program development and strategy interventions. We want to use their expertise when we think about clinical research because they have it there to offer. And so we want to bring the field along and acknowledging their expertise, their knowledge, but then also supporting the field in best practices of how do you engage those with suicide-centered lived experience? How do you use them and support them within the work that you're doing? So I'll drop a couple links in the chat for those who are interested in engaging in the work around our best practice registry, our Lived Experience Advisory Committee, the number of webinars, infographics, training tools that we have available for the field to continue advancing equity.
Thank you, Brittany. This was such an amazing conversation. Well, woefully short, because we could have listened to you for another hour. I do want to give a lot of credit to my friend Ashley, who was on it like a just a really quick behind the scenes. I said to Ashley, I said, you know, the Office of Behavioral Health Equity has a resource document from one of our centers of excellence, and where several of these COEs, we call them centers of excellence, that are population specific, develop suicide prevention resource guides. And they are specific to the population. And the one for the African American Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, out of our favorite at Morehouse, with Dr. Don Tyus. Shout out to you, Dr. Crosby. Ashley was kind enough to put that in the chat. It's filled with information specific to youth, families, and adults. So it is more comprehensive. But there's also, we have them for LGBTQ populations, for Hispanic, Latino, but I thought it would be befitting to share that here. So with that, and Brittany, thank you for being willing to share the resources that you have as well. So with that, I'm going to end there and say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and turn it over back to the moderators.
Thank you so much, Walker and Equity panel. Like, wow, he did not tell a lie when he said we could listen for another hour, because we really all could. It was excellent and so insightful. We're going to now turn it over to Janelle Cubbage, Public Health Advisor for the Suicide Prevention Branch, and a key member of the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative team, leading our Black Youth Suicide Prevention Learning Collaborative. Janelle will lead us in our question and answer portion of the webinar. Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you, Amber. Just happy to be here and further continue this conversation around Black youth suicide prevention. We've had a number of questions come into the chat. And my first question is for our youth and young adult panelists. So Janaya and Jalen, what are one or two tangible things that you want people from this webinar to walk away from as they're better trying to support Black youth and their mental health?
I can start. Yeah, I think that mentorship is really important. I think that if you have a youth that you know, whether they are interested in suicide or not, take them under your wing and show them that it is possible. You cannot be what you don't see. So I'm seeing so many of you guys who are interested in the work and are putting in the work and want to see youth thrive. And I know personally the importance of mentorship, as Janelle is here and she is one of my mentors, Brandon, who are so often just sewing into me and giving me the space to speak. And there's power in that. And that is something really tangible, and just showing youth that you care, that there's hope, that what you have to say matters, and that we don't just care about you in like academic spaces or professional spaces, but we care about your emotional well-being. We want to know what's going on with you, just checking in, making sure everything's going well with school, saying, hey, I have this opportunity, would you be interested in? That can go a really long way. And I know, like I said, from my personally experienced. What these two have done for me is something that I will never forget. That is really important part of my story. And they have shown me that I'm not done yet. And there are people that want to hear me. So I think that that is tangible, especially within the realms of speaking about suicide and preventing it.
That was a wonderful answer. I love Janiyah so much. She is just so well-spoken and so smart. I would say that, like Brittany said earlier, youth are more than just their storytelling and their experience. Just how Janiyah was incorporated into the process of creating the panel that we had this summer, include them in your research progress and include them in your trials. Don't just ask for their story, but make sure that they're included in the research, not only just by way of their story, by way of also by way of making sure that everything is running smoothly. Make sure that they know how to do research for themselves. Include them in your clinical trials as assistants or as maybe like in your professional classrooms. Make them teachers' assistants. Don't just listen to their story, but make sure that they also have stepping stools to success.
Thank you. And I'd like to add on to that, to pay them, because I think a lot of times, and this isn't just with youth, but communities that we're trying to work with, we expect to share this information with us freely, when really we should be honoring and valuing their work and contributions as much as ours are honored and valued. And so compensation is a really important piece in that, especially from an equity perspective. So here's another one. Would it benefit all youth to have a mental health curriculum integrated into academia? We do this for human biology, talking about hormones and sex education. So would this be a positive strategy to help address youth mental health and suicide prevention?
Not only is it crucial, but it is also important at early ages. Your mental health education should not start in high school and college. It should start in elementary school and pre-K, because those are also populations that experience mental health, even if it's something small, like their day-to-day emotions. People in kindergarten and pre-K should be learning how to regulate their emotions, how to express themselves, so on and so forth. Mental health is not an adults-only conversation. As we heard before, there are students or youth that are 13, 14, experiencing suicidal thoughts. So them learning about it in high school and college does not help them if they are experiencing suicide at a younger age.
And I would also, okay.
Oh, you can go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, oh, I'm sorry. You can go ahead.
Janiyah, you go ahead. I'll let you go first and I'll go after you.
I just wanted to add, like, the importance of also making that pit stop in the curriculum and saying, like, this is the unique factors that go into being Black and dealing with mental health, or being Indigenous and dealing with mental health. And like you were saying earlier, Dr. Richardson, saying and making it clear, like, you are Black, therefore you face certain challenges, and those who are not Black, knowing they are Black, and this is something that they will face and that you should be aware of, just out of the consideration of your fellow human being. I think that that's important, and I think that we learn things like that very early on. I think that we learn hate and we learn intolerance for other people. So I think that when we have conversations of mental health, just like we learn these things, we can also learn to be considerate of culture being a part of mental health and understanding it and being considerate of others. So yeah.
And Janiyah, we were on the same wavelength. That's why we were interrupting each other. And I would add, I agree, we need culturally inclusive and responsive training added to the curriculum. And when I think about Black populations, what's also important is us understanding his mental health history as it relates to Black people, because we show up the way we do because of our experiences in this society. For instance, back during slavery, Black women who had their kids taken away from them and grieved or showed emotion were penalized for that. And then they could also be diagnosed with a mental health condition for showing emotions. And so some of the numbness that happens and occurs within our race is because how we were, how our early experiences and how our ancestors had to cope and hide the pain. We still hide the pain. We don't talk about the pain. And so there's some historical basis to why we are the way we are that we need to understand so that we can begin to interrogate that and resist that and shut it down, because it needs to be shut down.
That's a really great point, and you're right. We have to know and involve our history in everything that we do regarding our mental health, regarding suicide prevention, because like you said, it does go back that far. Some of these are really long-standing coping mechanisms that we develop to survive a really brutal existence that don't serve us at this point. So piggybacking off of that, you know, because there is this stigma around suicide and mental health in our community, because we are more likely to experience that numbness and not talk about it and try to shoulder our struggles on our own. How do you approach reluctant parents who are concerned about having these conversations with their kids, about talking to suicide directly and openly with their children?
As Janaya said before so eloquently, you cannot be what you can't see. A lot of these parents are seeing many stuff their feelings down, thugging it out, as you will, and seemingly being fine on the surface, but nobody knows what anyone is going through their day-to-day life. No one knows what anyone is going through below the surface. So when people or parents see, okay, well, so-and-so didn't talk about their mental health and they're doing fine, they don't know that they're actually not doing fine. So just normalizing the conversation, just making sure that, again, you cannot be what you can't see. So making sure that you see and that these parents see that it's okay to talk about your mental health. Nothing bad will happen to you if you do so. In fact, it can be quite beneficial. Just making sure and reinforcing that it's okay to not be okay.
And I would add that the parents might not, there may be parents who aren't receptive to having conversations about mental health, but there are other adults and the resources available. So oftentimes our youth will turn to other resources. So for example, what I've shared with some Black youth that I work with, your parents might not be into you going to a therapy, and they might not like really be open to mental health services. And they'll get there hopefully with time. But there is a 988 resource line. It's a suicide and crisis line that you can call and speak to a trained provider, and have a brief call if you feel like you're in that state of crisis where you need to speak to someone. And you can do that on your own as a youth. You don't necessarily have to have parent consent or approval for that. And so there are resources available. You can talk to a school counselor, you can talk to other people. And so use the resources that are available until that parent gets to the point that they're more receptive to getting some care.
And if I could add another piece onto that too, two different examples. One is there's a program called Sources of Strength. And one of the things they realized as they were doing the training is that it wasn't necessary to try to train, when they did it in schools, to try to train every teacher. There were teachers or faculty or staff that the students automatically went to. They were, if you want to call them natural helpers. It might be the bus driver, might be the cafeteria person, might be the coach, might be somebody else. So you give them some training and some education on how to respond to youth and how to be that additional resource, or, that person that they can come to and talk to. Some of it might also be trying to educate the parents, because some parents, as there are some people with the attitudes, if I talk about sex, the children will go out and do more of it. Well, they think if I talk about suicide, they're going to go out and, attempt suicide. Well, we know that that's not true. And so for some of the youth, they were already thinking about it even before you raised the issue. So in some cases, there is, an opportunity to try to educate parents, try to educate guardians, try to educate caretakers about actually talking about it is helpful. Most people who've been thinking about it and been trying to hold it in, they're looking for an avenue for somebody to open up that conversation so they can express what's going on. So that may be part of it, is trying to educate the parents and the adults in the room, trying to educate the adults in the room about, what's going on, and there are ways to address it. And, if you still don't feel comfortable, actually, we've got some folks in the school or in the boys club or in the gym or in the neighborhood that know how to do this.
Janelle, if I can quickly jump in and echo from Dr. Crosby and the information and how we're educating them, doing that and sharing that information from folks that they identify with, right? And so sometimes it might be difficult or challenging to hear that information, take information, education from the clinical space. But if you're receiving a resource guide that was developed by parents, communities, and youth, that may be an easier way, right, to open up your mind to some of the ideas and ways in which folks are talking with their children about this. And so thinking about the ways and what we're actually using to share that information, education, is critical. And I'll share an SPRC resource that we have in the chat that was developed by youth, their parents, and their communities.
And also just jumping in about a couple ideas here. I think that so many great points have been made, and especially going off of what Dr. Crosby was saying here around how we can start having some of these conversations, remembering that mental health socialization is a thing, right? Where we don't just jump in starting with necessarily this topic, but if we're creating an atmosphere, if we're teaching parents, teachers how to, from the beginning, right, have these various conversations around multiple domains of mental health, we can see how this creates potentially an atmosphere where this would feel a little bit more natural, perhaps, right? Or just how do we have these conversations around mental health? Similarly to, right, how we do this with race. We don't just, right, we educate around racism may happen, right? This is how we prepare. We say that. We don't wait necessarily for the racism to happen, right? But that's almost conditioned within us to have those conversations. So in that same way, how do we have these conversations around mental health from all of these different aspects? I think that's important. I also think this is where we can see that technology can also be a way to reach parents, to reach the community on how to provide these trainings more accessibly. So yeah, those were two additional thoughts.
Thank you. And so my final question for all of the panelists, how can we build intergenerational connections to help advance suicide prevention efforts and improve our communication and knowledge about suicide prevention?
I can go. I think what we're doing right now is really important. I do think that strength in numbers is something that is still very true. I think when people of similar thought processes or similar missions come together, really powerful things happen, and we all come with different personal experiences, different levels of education, different lived experience, and all of that matters when we come together and try to make something that works for Black youth or for suicide prevention. So I think continuing to come together and support each other and build on the ideas and building on what is once impossible and making it possible is something that will always really be strong when trying to build these efforts for generations to come.
I'd just like to echo something that I heard at the last panel that was so eloquently said by one of my co-panelists, Charity Fisher. She said it's important to not only be generational soul or curse breakers, but also generational soul starters, or soul cycle starters. It's important to do things that work well over and over and over again. So if there's things that you are doing within your focus groups or within your youth groups that you find are working or that you find are truly elevating the experience, keep doing them. Yes, it's important to focus on things that might not be going so well, but it's also important to give recognition to things that are working for you. So just continue to do things that you notice are helping.
If I could add on a piece too, and I'm going to go back to something that Jalen mentioned in terms of there are youth that are active in doing things already. And, one of the things that comes to mind was after the Marjorie Stoneman school shooting, there was a group of adolescents at that school that said, we need to do something about gun violence. And they started to get active, started to put their groups together, started to go in and advocating at their state legislature. It's not hard to find some of them out there. And that's where, us as adults got to, oh, these young people are already moving. Let me get in with them and try to bring them and give them some, some of what I do, but then also add on to what they're doing too. So in some cases, all you got to do is look around and you'll find the youth that are already saying, hey, we need to do something about this. And all it is maybe channeling even, here's where your energy, I think this is the best way to go, and listening to them and say, okay, this is the path that I think is going to be the most effective and make the most difference.
I would
Thank you. Oh yeah, go ahead, Dr. Richardson.
I'll just quickly add, while we're doing all of the good work, to document the work that we're doing and leave artifacts. So I think about maybe publishing, putting the stuff in writing, making sure like what works in one state, another state has access to that. And then also like there's some great documentaries out, like While the Children Fade, that tells the story of 3 Black mothers who lost their kids to suicide. There are artifacts that are being produced on this work, and we got to be able to have something documented for future generations so they can refer back to it and not have to keep relearning. We have it documented and it's available and accessible.
Thank you. That's such a great point. Well, I think that I have enough questions. We could probably have about 8 more webinars, but I will digress and I will hand it over to Ashley and Amber. But thank you again to our panelists for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much, Janelle, and the panelists. Y'all were amazing. I'm sure everyone's like, no more, right? And we're hoping to continue this conversation. But please check out SAMHSA suicide prevention resources and our resource page. If you want the resources listed here, we'll be able to send it to you. And definitely check out our suicide prevention website that Brandon actually mentioned earlier, that was updated along with some other really great targeted resources surrounding this topic. Next slide. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to Brandon, myself, or Ashley Hustins. Next slide.
I think that's it. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our Hall of Famers on the panel for sharing so much wisdom with us. We hope to be connecting with everyone again soon. Have a
Thank you
wonderful
all.